Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Tuesday Tea with Elsa. I'm out here on the small pasture with Atlas. Atlas is enjoying a little bit of grass. You can see we've set up a small grass paddock here, sort of corridor with big tall fences. And this allows me to get Atlas out on the grass in a way that I feel really safe about, even if Atlas is not feeling particularly emotionally stable. The good news is Atlas is doing better and better every day. So I have a feeling we're going to be able to go out in those pastures on the other side of that big fence in the next couple of days. Every day I come out here, we go ahead and we start our work together, and I see how his responses are, whether they are reliable and responsible or not. Oh, I love it. It's like a big party. Thank you guys for showing up for tea time. So I wanted to talk a little bit about freedom of choice because it's a really interesting subject. When any of us make choices, I think we do it for one primary reason and one secondary reason. The primary reason we make a choice is because we want to feel better. Not necessarily good, but better. And there's so many different criteria for what better looks like, and it's very individual. The secondary criteria for why we make a choice is because we want community. We want friends. And this is a really interesting thing because a horse like Atlas, who's had a lot of trauma in his life, is not always going to choose that secondary reason to make a choice because his friends have not always worked out very well. And so if he's gotten in a lot of situations where he chose to be with friends, but then he got hurt, he's going to look at a situation and say, maybe I would rather be by myself. Maybe friends are not a good option. And this is something we run into with the other horses. You know, he wants to be with them at first, but when they start doing things that raise his stress levels, he is likely to attack the other horses. He and I have worked really, really hard to make attack not one of his go-to choices. So if he's with me and I start to do things that raise his stress levels, he's going to run away from me. And I would much rather he run away from me than he attack me. So that works for me. But we run into an interesting problem with horses because we want them to have freedom of choice, but we also want them to choose to be with us. That's why we have horses. We want to do things with them. And so, you know, we do things like we put a halter and a lead rope on them and we say, well, I want my horse to have freedom of choice, but the lead rope is going to stop him from leaving me. Okay, and then you say, well, is that freedom of choice still? Even a small pasture like this, okay, Atlas obviously is grazing. He would like to graze. Would he like to graze this close to me? Probably not. He probably would choose to graze a lot farther from me if there wasn't the fences here. So I am giving him freedom of choice, but I'm also putting him in a situation where his choices are limited to things that I think are a good idea. He lives in a human world. He doesn't get to be a wild horse. Therefore, he needs to build associations that he feels better when he is close to people. Because as people, we want to be able to help him. We want to be able to give him veterinary care, to trim his feet, to feed him things that will keep him healthy, to help him exercise so he feels good. There's so many things that we want to do for a horse. So they have to assume that life is going to be better with people, okay? But their experience in life has not always led them to believe this. Sometimes they look at a person and they say, being close to you is not going to make my life better. I'm not sure I want to be with you. Perhaps I want to be by myself. Or the other thing is they say, life with my horse friends makes me feel better. Life with my people friends, not so much. So this, of course, turns, you guys can see Atlas, brings us to the subject of food reinforcement. Okay, and I want to say that food reinforcement is just beautiful when it's done right. Okay, I am a firm believer in positive reinforcement training. The problem is there's a feel and timing that has to go along with it. Because if you do not reinforce frequently enough, horses end up feeling worse because of the lag time between reinforcements. And they can actually get to a point where they associate a lot of worse feeling with the training because the food is not being delivered on a schedule or on a timing that helps them feel better. And so feel and timing is incredibly important when you start using positive reinforcement. Breezy's here with us too. He's talking a little bit about some noises he heard on the driveway. So freedom of choice, you know, it's interesting. I want my horse to have freedom of choice, but I want them to choose things that involve me. I really don't want them to choose to not be with me. So therefore, I have to work at having them associate me with feeling better, not worse. If they associate me with feeling worse, not better, they are going to end up choosing things other than being with me. And I don't necessarily think food reward is the way I want to go about it. In freedom-based training, we take away all of those tools like food rewards. Now, obviously, Atlas is grazing here. I'm not going to take away all the food in the environment, but it's not delivered from me. It's something that he can eat on his own in the environment that we share. For me, my primary reinforcer for freedom-based training is to be like the horse, to do things exactly like the horse is doing. But here's the trick with that. Horses only enjoy that when their stress is low enough. If their stress is too high and you try and match the horse, you're going to find it triggers fight, flight, and freeze. So yeah, exactly, George. When we become the reward, it's deeply intrinsic. And that's really wonderful. But we have to know what a reward looks like for each horse. So what I've learned, slow trial and error, with Atlas is he has a hard time with me looking at exactly the same thing he's looking at unless his stress is low enough. So when his stress is particularly high, if I look at the same thing Atlas is looking at, it actually almost serves as a subtle punishment instead of a reward. It makes his life a little bit harder, not a little bit easier. So I have to be careful. If I want to make Atlas's life easier, I have to choose a complementary focus. I have to be like him, but not exactly like him. And that was really hard for me to learn. I had always worked with horses that had naturally lower stress levels. And when they have naturally lower stress levels, you can match them. You can be just like them. And they say, oh, yes, that makes my life better. But when their stress levels get a little bit too high, you're going to need to find complementary ways of being like them instead of matching ways to be like them. And it took me a really long time to figure that out with Atlas. We're doing much better now that I understand that. Yeah, Julie, it was so far from my understanding of how horses operate that it was really hard for me to take the evidence and actually understand it. He had to repeat his behaviors over and over and over for me to realize when I look at the same thing as he is, if his stress is too high, he will go into fight or flight or freeze. If I know that his stress is really low, then he's going to see matching behavior as a reward or a reinforcement or something that makes him feel better. And yes, Katerina, I think you're absolutely right. That's how Shady is. And I wish that I had known that when I was working with you and Shady in New Zealand. You and I were doing the very best we could with the information we had, but we have to tailor it to the horse we've got. So freedom of choice means that horses are going to respond to every situation in the way that they feel is either likely to make them feel better, or it's likely to bond them with their herd mates, which is a secondary thing. If bonding with their herd mates has made them feel bad in the past, they're not going to choose that option. They're going to choose something that makes them feel better. So those are my thoughts on the subject. It's obviously a really big subject to dive into. How you cause a horse to feel better when they're around you is a really massive subject. If you're doing something like food rewards that are a very obvious way to help the horse feel better when they're around you, you have to notice, how do they feel all the times that food is not going into their mouth? All the times that food is not going into their mouth, is that outweighing the good with more bad feeling than good feeling, or more worse feeling than better feeling? And that is a really tricky subject when you do positive reinforcement training. As I said, it's beautiful when it's done really well. It can be really problematic when you get the timing wrong. So Ariana says, higher stress levels with Fred mean that he likes to have me there because we can play mouths or have a piece of cloth or rope he can chew. So yeah, that is, that form of play, Oriana, is a way that Fred knows he's going to feel better. And if you can offer him that, that's great. But the problem's going to be if you can't offer him that. If you're with him and you can't offer him that, do you have a list of other things you can offer him? And that's the thing I really want to bring up, is when we are training with horses, we want to have the widest diversity possible of ways that we can cause the horse to feel good in our company. And the wider that diversity of possibilities is, the more likely you're going to enjoy time with your horse all the time. If you only have a couple of things that the horse enjoys, then it's going to be really difficult to spend time with them without sometimes making them feel worse. So Kristen says, if they don't understand what the food is for, it can cause even higher stress than some negative reinforcement. Yeah, it's one of those things, if you can do food reinforcement right, with the good feel, good timing, the horse understands what it's for, that's fabulous. If the timing gets a little off or the horse doesn't understand and their stress goes up, well, what happens when stress goes up? You see more fight, more flight, more freeze. And when you start to see those behaviors, the horse is going to associate you more with feeling worse instead of feeling better. So, I encourage you, watch your horse. Never subscribe to absolute rules, okay? All of us trainers are going to try and give you rules to follow because people like rules. But the fact is, there's going to be a horse out there who thinks differently. So you have to watch what the horse likes, watch what the horse wants to do, watch when the feelings get better and when the feelings get worse. And if you have some idea, then you can shape your behavior around that. Now, I just wanted you guys to notice, Atlas has made his way to the far side of the paddock with his tail facing us. Okay, this is pretty common behavior. Atlas is generally going to choose to be farther away from people if there is an equal amount of good feeling available close and far away. So if a horse likes the good feelings they get from the environment and it happens to be closer to people, that's when Atlas will choose to be close to people. But if, we're out here in the grass and the grass tastes equally good in all the places, you're going to find that he goes to the farthest space and he turns his tail to me. I'm not going to take this personally. Atlas has had a lot of trauma in his life. Having a little bit more distance from people gives him a feeling like he might be a little safer. So Jesse says emotion over training quadrant every time. Emotion is linked in with the training quadrants. That's all there is to it. We have to accept that and work with that. So think about it. Think about what your horse likes. Think about what they don't like. It's not that you never do something they don't like. It's that you think of how much of the time spent together do they feel better, and how much of the time do they feel worse. There has to be some contrast. There has to be some variation. All of that is true. But if we're talking about freedom of choice, horses are going to choose things that have made them feel better in the past. And it's your job to figure out how many different ways you can be associated with better feeling instead of worse feeling. Jesse says, sorry, people put the focus on the quadrant over how the horse feels. Yeah, absolutely, Jesse. I agree with that. And when we talk about freedom of choice and we don't have so many motivators, we then really have to learn to value the emotions more than the quadrant of training we think we're using. So I'm going to leave you guys all with that, mostly because my arm is really tired from pounding in fence posts, so it's shaking as I hold my camera out here. And yeah, Katerina, we do have pileated woodpeckers around here. That might have been what you were hearing. Yeah, Atlas is doing really well. Really, really well. His emotional stability is just growing in leaps and bounds every day. I'm just going to answer this one question. Kim says, not sure, but it sounds like working with my Mustang is what you're discussing. I'm getting her used to the saddle pad while she's eating in the pasture. That seems comfortable for her. Not sure if it's wrong or right. It's absolutely right to do things like that in a situation. You just have to be aware that when you take away the soothing nature of the grass, she might feel very differently about the saddle pad. So you just don't be surprised by that. So thank you guys for joining me for tea time. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. And I've given you some stuff to think about. And I'll look forward to seeing you next week.